Listen, I love the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG to death, but even I have to admit, we're not doing too hot at the moment, to put it very lightly. And with a ban list not happening for at least another month, many people have looked into alternatives. This is not me quitting, just wanting to tell you guys about how, by pure coincidence, a couple months back, I got my feet wet in the sandy seas of Arrakis, and have put a good couple of hours into Dune Imperium, be it in person or digitally. So, with that being said, let me take you on a journey into a almost sorta card game, but mainly a board game that I've absolutely come to adore over the past couple months. A friend of mine, after sitting through, a couple games of Yu-Gi-Oh, sat me down and was like, hey, let's jam a game of this as well. I'd like some home field advantage of my own. Before we started, I got handed another set of cards with characters on them, which is where your average game of Dune Imperium will begin, in the character select screen. Of course, including big names like Paul Atreides and the Baron von Harkonnen. But generally, if you've read the books or at least like somewhat familiar with, the movies, the books, you'll find some familiar faces here and there. My initial pick was Count von Richese. With a passive ability to draw cards, my Yu-Gi-Oh! Brain clicked and was like, card draw, me like. Each character in the game basically has a passive ability that's either always active or provides certain bonuses once a condition is met. For example, when you play as Paul, you're always able to see the top card of your deck, which can be quite handy for draws. Or, in my case, if you spend money on a field, you get to draw a card, which is quite nice. On top of that, each character also has, I guess, something you could call an active ability in a sense, that is tied to their Signet Ring card, which is a card each player gets one of in their starting deck. These abilities range from, reserving specific cards from the shop, getting resources at the very base level, just, a multitude of effects that you can kind of, look through and see what suits you the most. But let's move from the characters into an actual game. At the start, from the absolute basics onwards, the games for up to 4 players will be played on a game board, board game smile, with different fields that we'll talk about later in a moment. And in your turn, you can move one of your 2 starting agents, basically your turn cap per round, onto a space corresponding with a field or color outlined on the card you play. Mostly to, generate, trade in one of the 3 main resources in Solari, which is money, spice, or water, for, more resources, different resources, or other benefits in a competition for victory points, which there's a good couple of ways to gain those, which decide whoever wins at the end of either 10 rounds or the finale. Finale is basically just one final round once one of the players reaches 10 victory points. At start of round, conflicts revealed, but another thing we'll talk about later. And then, the players do take their turns, moving agents onto different spaces of the boards. So with that, let's talk about those board spaces. We'll not be talking about expansions for, the first part of this. Makes the whole thing a bit simpler, especially if you start now. At the top center of the board, you will find the green spaces. These usually cost an amount of Solari and grant you different benefits. Most notable here are the High Council for some guaranteed influence each turn to spend on new cards, or the Mentat for a temporary additional agent turn, or the Swordmaster for permanent additional agent's turn after you buy them. Top right and the lower part of the board center hold the yellow spaces. These are instrumental for the 2 resources that are Solari and Spice. You can easily trade in Spice for Solari, but Spice is still important on its own. Game gives you access to some of the more powerful effects in the game. Some late game fields do really need it. So, it's quite flexible in that regard. Also, fun fact, it is the first tiebreaker in case 2 people have the same number of victory points. So maybe you want to watch out for your spice once, you start getting to those later turns. Most notable yellow spaces here are Cell Melange, which is a very easy way to turn a bit of spice into a lot of money, or the Great Flats, which is just the field that will overall probably award you the most spice once you harvest it. Above the yellow spaces in the board center is where you will find the blue spaces. Most of these will award you with an army you can deploy into conflicts and some other bonus, be it a card draw or some water. The two rightmost ones are very easily accessed with decent bonuses, and the two on the left make for pretty late, good, like mid to late game plays, as these are tied to either a cost or a condition in influence and action. Most notable here is the research station. For that sweet draw 3 you can get for 2 pieces of water. The entire left column of the board is taken up by the alliance tracks, where you can gain favor with one or more of the 4 factions by sending an agent to one of their spaces. These award some pretty crazy bonuses. Not only are the fields pretty solid, but mainly you can gain victory points by, leveling up your influence in the faction. The second level you get a permanent victory point, and if you hold the alliance marker by after reaching level 4 in a faction's influence track having the most influence with that faction, you get a temporary victory point while, you have the most influence in that faction. Which, allows for potential 8 victory points, which, if the finale triggers at 10, there's a good lot to be gained here. Diplomacy is definitely not to be underestimated. Some of the most notable spaces here are the still suits in the Fremen faction for some consistent water access, very important on a desert planet. Selective breeding with the Bene Gesserit faction that will probably prop up once or twice again. Don't mind the name, it is just called that, please. For some deck thinning, destroying your less powerful cards, and the late game bomb that is Highliner, which awards a whopping 5 armies to send out into combat. And at the topic of combat, Highliner does become very important when it comes to conflicts. Mentioned at the start, one of these gets flipped up at the start of every round, and these are fought in the bottom left of the board, where every player has their garrison, where they store armies, and the zone where these armies are deployed. Players start with 3 armies each in their garrison, and are able to deploy 2 of those, plus the amount gained from a field once they place an agent onto a combat field. So, for example, if you were to go onto the Highliner field, you are able to, because it is a combat field marked by the 2 crossed machetes in the bottom left corner, you're able to not only put 2 armies into a conflict from your garrison, because you put an agent onto a combat field, but you can also commit the same 5 armies you've just gotten from the Highliner field into that conflict, which, probably highlights why Highliner is such a very important space when it comes to those late game conflicts, as you're able to deploy a lot of troops very quickly, even at a steep cost of 6 spice. Once every player has taken their turns and gone through their reveal phase, more on that later. I know, recurring theme throughout this video. More on that later. The video, we'll get to that once we get to it. A conflict gets resolved at the end of the round, and every deployed army is able to grant a player 2 combat power, and at the end of it, the players with the most combat power get rewards equal to their ranking from places 1, 3, depending on the power. But with that being said, let's move into what caught me the most when I first started this game, and that is of course the card game portion. Every card has 3 important characteristics: the board spaces they allow you to move on, the effects you gain when you play them, to move onto a field, and the bonuses and effects they provide when you reveal them at the end of your turn. Let's take what is currently my favorite card in the game as an example, since it has all of the above. Shifting Allegiances is a card with a yellow and green marker, allowing you to move onto unoccupied yellow and green fields. And if you move onto said field, you're able to use the effect in the white box at the card's center. In this case, paying 2 spice to move down 1 rank in an alliance track, and then move 2 up in another track of the alliance, which can be the same one. It's a quite flexible and unique effect that allows for like a couple neat plays when it comes to manipulating your influence levels, even at a baseline. Just turning 2 spice into an additional rank, so moving down 1 and moving up 2, is kind of neat. And lastly, the number at the bottom in the blue square shows you the amount of influence you get when the card is revealed at the end of your turn, giving you 2 more points to spend on new cards. There's also cards that provide other benefits, be it additional combat power or sometimes resources, which can of course be very helpful, but mainly cards will give you an amount of influence once you reveal them. Your starting deck will be 10 almost entirely very basic cards that mostly allow you to just move to 1 type of space. The one exception here being your Signet Ring card. This is, as previously mentioned, the card that is tied to your character's active ability. But on top of that, it's also a fairly flexible one, allowing you access to 3 different types of spaces in yellow, blue, and green. From the first round onwards, when, you've got no agents left to send to the field, or, you just don't feel like taking another move, you can reveal your hand and get influence to spend on cards from the Imperium row. These are 5 cards out of a fairly large pool of potentially very powerful cards, or you can buy one of the 2 guarantees. One of these being the Arrakis Liaison with solid spaces in blue and green. It also gives you 2 influence when revealed. Is an okay draft if you're just looking for, a solid standalone card. And the fairly late game important, the Spice Must Flow. A card that immediately gives you a victory point when bought, and a piece of spice when revealed. But as mentioned, very much a late game option, as that one costs you 9 influence. A card's influence price is marked in the blue square at the top right. Below that, you might find additional effects a card provides once you acquire it. Those range from, gaining influence to sometimes resources. The cards you get from the Imperium row is, I think, what makes deck building so rewarding and also interesting, since you're able to draft either individually powerful cards or, just simply cards that work well with your character. Personal example, since I do play a lot of Country Chase still, I like drafting green cards, since those give me access to the green spaces, which allow me to pay money to draw cards. So, something like the Guild Ambassador is a very nice way to get some much needed spice into rotation, potentially for some additional spacing guild influence, while I'm still able to access, the more important spaces to my character, like the Mentat. Something like the Gunthopter, on the other hand, is just solid overall. Good spaces in yellow and blue. If you play it, you get to destroy like a garrisoned army from each of your opponents, and if you reveal it, even without an influence value, 3 combat power and being able to deploy a garrisoned army into a conflict is pretty sick. But you're also able to go for like an almost themed draft. If the stars align and you're able to draft a lot of cards from one of the factions, you can almost play a strategy similar to an archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Starting off with the hardest one to get together in the Spacing Guild. Didn't have the pleasure of playing this too often, but if you get a Spacing Guild draft together, it's always a lot of fun, because it forms like a very good resource loop of, giving you spice, giving you money, and giving you, ways to turn these into either more of each other, or, influence in the Spacing Guild, or, other benefits. It's very cool. Especially late game with the aforementioned Guild Ambassador, you even get a way to buy victory points. Pretty strong. On the other hand, a faction like the Bene Gesserit has good feels, so, having cards that allow you to get into the Bene Gesserit influence track is always handy, because, as mentioned earlier, selective breeding is good for deck thinning, and the secret space is just a good way to get intrigues. You have a couple hand control options with Test of Humanity and Mother Mohiam, which is a rather annoying combination of cards to sit across from. And there's God. Just God, he's just chilling. And yeah, moving on, the Fremen have a handful of strong benefits, especially if you have an alliance with them or other Fremen cards. The Worm Riders are a very scary reveal. If you have a Fremen alliance, you just casually gain 6 combat power if you reveal it. And others mainly just give you additional bonuses if you have other Fremen cards through their Fremen bond abilities. Basically abilities that trigger once you have played a Fremen card in that turn, which is kind of cool. Kind of this like strength in unity vibe, which is very nice. Lastly, the Emperor is, it's almost the least interesting in terms of like a themed draft, because while the Emperor has like a couple, individually powerful cards like Sardaukar Legion for some bonus armies, Firm Grip for additional influence gain, there's no real theme connecting these. It's mostly just like good cards that like give you resources, and that's kind of it. So yeah, there's a lot of things to do and combine depending on your character, the game state, or, of course, what the draft hands you, which does give you a lot of agency and also a lot of skill expression, which is quite nice. And once you get some cards together that, either allow you to destroy parts of your deck, or use, the fields that allow you to do that, once your draft really starts going, it does feel great. It absolutely feels great once, the stars align and things start coming together. It's pretty sick. But as a wise man once said, I am not done yet. Because lastly, I'd still like to talk about intrigues. You can get intrigues a couple ways as rewards for conflicts, a couple board spaces award these. Intrigues are cards with widely varying effects once again. Some simply give you resources, others draw you cards. Some even allow you to increase your combat power for free or for a cost, and others can be pretty banger late game payoffs to work towards. Think of them almost like trap cards in a way, because they really scare the shit out of people in late game conflicts when you have like 2 to 3 intrigues like somewhere laying around, your space where you keep your resources, like a mirror force would in, the olden days. But yeah, this should give you like a basic overview of the mechanics and some of like my favorite points of Dune Imperium as a game. Before I start wrapping this up, I do have to kind of say, there's a couple differences from like digital to paper play, so something to keep in mind depending on where you start and when you transition from like one to the other. Conflicts are a bit harsher in paper. Getting second in a conflict that only 2 people take part of means you get no rewards. Digitally, you'd still be, if you were playing digitally, you'd still be able to grab the rewards for second place, for example. And, in the paper game, some spaces are just, not accessible in some cases. For example, a good example is the Mentat. Digitally, you're easily able to go onto the Mentat space, even if the Mentat is not there for grabs. In paper, you'd probably have to work that out with the people you're playing with. But yeah, let's maybe give some final thoughts. I think I've been rambling for way too long again. As mentioned, Ed, when I explained how cards and deck building work, drafting feels so good. It's very rewarding to, have like a good knowledge of the card pool and know what cards to pick when and with what character. With, of course, there's certain guidelines you want to fulfill, but there's still like a good bit of freedom you have. Sometimes you can draft a card just because you think it's neat. I did that with Shifting Allegiances when I first played, and it became my favorite card in the game because it's kind of cool. But just themes overall you're probably familiar with when, you've played other sealed or limited environments in other games. And if those are up your alley, you might, find something here that you also really enjoy about this, which is kind of nice, and has definitely caught my attention. It's a lot of fun, and always a blast, to be honest. Also, Dune Imperium manages to almost get, those same highs out of you as certain combos in Yu-Gi-Oh! Give you. Sometimes an intrigue like Plans Within Plans can be absolutely game warping because you start working towards, the diplomacy department, getting, the influence goals to get like in the finale 1 or 2 additional victory points in. Some of these can be very telegraphed, so people can definitely disrupt you in these. Or when you set up for that big turn, set up like a highliner play, potentially have like God to like maybe go for it again or something. It's pretty great. And pre-planning overall is highly encouraged, and rewarded even. Making sure, you set up resources in, advance, checking maybe the other player's resources to know if you have to move to certain spaces early if they're crucial to your turn, or, just sequencing your cards right. Using maybe more flexible ones later in a round, later in a round, if practical, which is quite nice. At times, almost got that Monopoly vibe where, you can really put a wrench in people's plans if you, take spaces away from them. And it's often the case that, especially late game, someone doesn't move, and then, at least like 1 or 2 people at the table are just like, this kind of screws me over. It's pretty cool. And then the characters, they also add like another great layer of customization to it. You can either just jam a favorite character, someone you think looks neat, or, something that suits your personal playstyle. Like if you found yourself, enjoying conflicts, or, focusing on conflicts the most, a conflict-based character like the Beast, for example, would probably be pretty cool for you. So that's like an additional layer that's, is a very nice touch in my opinion. Generally, it's a really deep and like very expressive board game experience. Something I'm not used to because I don't play a lot of board games. But something that has caught me in many ways, mainly because I'm a TCG player, and therefore I do like the aspects of this that are very familiar for a lot of TCG players. And while the learning curve may be steep, but once you get in the swing of things, it's an absolute blast, be it with friends or even just jamming games against the AI. By the way, the game even has an AI for the paper version, so that's kind of funny. And that AI can even prove rather challenging at times, especially when it comes to conflicts. But yeah, can recommend the digital version that's available on Steam. It's a lot less inexpensive than the paper version. It's like half of that, I think, if you're looking to get into this game as well. It's, as mentioned, cheaper, and it's also just a lot easier to get going on something that's, automated and also presented very nicely, I think. It's also getting the first expansion in Rise of X soon, so, maybe it's something to look out for. And with that, the other expansion in Immortality may follow one day as well. Post, recording, Laval jumping in once again for the outro. If you've made it this far, I'd just like to really thank you a whole lot for, sitting through that. I know, just watching someone ramble on for 15 to 20 minutes can be kind of taxing, especially if it's something you may not be familiar with. So huge thank you for that. Otherwise, let me know in the comments below if you are maybe familiar with Dune Imperium, if there are, aspects of the game that I may have missed that you maybe want to shed some light on. Or, maybe share some of your favorite aspects about the game. I'd be absolutely happy to hear about it. Because, I don't know, there doesn't seem to be, a whole lot of, talk about the game online from what I've seen. But maybe that's just me not looking in the right places. Otherwise, if this video has gotten you interested in the game, do let me know that as well. It'd be very interesting to hear from, unfamiliar people maybe, for which, this might be a pretty new experience. But, yeah, with all that being said, I'll be thanking you guys very much for watching again, and I'll be seeing you guys again next time. But until then, goodbye.